So I finished reading the book Fretting and Moaning last night because I like to read things. I like to have it fresh in my mind. And
Okay.
so obviously I know you've already written your autobiography, One Train After. So
Later.
so that was straight up autobiographical. But the obvious first question, which I'm sure you're being asked for every interview you're doing for this book, is just exactly how autobiographical they are, because my assumption is, of course, since they all are about some kind of vignette in the day of a life of a musician or someone in the music business, that they're either something that happened to you or that you witnessed happen to, they're composite of things that have happened in your life. So how
Yeah.
autobiographical
Well,
is
no, we
it?
have to qualify that because, if they were just autobiographical, that would sort of imply that I have no imagination and I don't know how to write. So that's bull.
Okay,
Got to
good
be
to
able to
know.
like, they're like, I have lived somewhat a life of a musician, as you may well know. So you have to have active imagination. As I sort of started getting, I mean, the writing thing is in me. Maybe I really start. I've always had to write things, being the person I am. Can you write about this? Can you do that? Can you answer these questions? Can you write an essay? I've done a lot of this. So the autobiography and these fiction stories are, somewhat an extension of all that. But of course, I've been through many quite bizarre situations in my life as a guitarist. So when I started thinking, I had written a few, maybe 4 or 5 around 2012. I had like a little taste of it just for fun, not like, oh, this has got to be a book. I was just amusing myself. And I sent them to a couple of people and I got a really good response saying, oh, you should do this as a book. No, I didn't really do a lot about it, but I started to make notes of like, these could be ideas. And, so I was searching the memory bank for various situations I'd been in, compiled them all up. And some of it was just pure imagination. How about if you're a Japanese groupie and wants to meet an English rock star, for instance, just an idea, and then see if there's anything there or not. There's one in there that's all takes place in LA in the 1930s, but that's completely imagined. So it's a combination of, the best writing for writers is done if you write from your own life, no question about it. If you've experienced it, but of course it does involve active imagination and, technique, writing technique, prose ability, how to construct a sentence, how to construct a story. But there's a lot of other mental considerations. It's just like music, you have to think it through. And the great part of it is always in the revision, the rewrites. That's where it all really comes together. It's a labor of love, I really enjoyed doing it.
So this has been almost a decade in the making then.
Well, yeah, not like 10 years working out. I did a few. Then there was time off. I was doing a lot of gigs. 2017 or 18, I started reading a couple of them on stage and they were going down well. And again, I got the same response. You should do this. So somewhere in there, I went, okay, I am going to do this. And then I started to really sit down and write a lot to construct all these stories for the book.
So, kind of an obvious question, but you've had 2 experiences. One, like I said, writing a memoir, an autobiography, which was straight up autobiographical. This one, which is not. Which one was more difficult and which one was more fun to do?
I'd say the autobiography was more difficult in a way. I mean, when I started writing that, and I just wrote everything I could ever think of, and I had an 800-page book. It was like, dude, calm down. Let's start cutting it down, which I did, And, I showed it to a couple of people. They said, why don't you take this out or add this in, and, I was in the moment. It took me, I sort of put it together. And then I said, all right, now I'm really going to do this. And I think it's all I did for 6 months was write that autobiography. And the second half of that book, which is like part 2, was about the police, the time in the police. And that there were so many dates, factual events, my God, so many hit records, all that kind of stuff. I actually constructed in my studio, like, line of paper along the wall, the sort of scaffolding of that whole era. And I had to research all the dates, make sure that I got things right. And once I got that in place, like this is the sort of technical scaffolding of this, then I started to write in it as a person emotionally and everything, and the real inner life of the band. So that was, kind of a setup, but I'm pretty smart. I figured it out.
But I guess, yeah, the fact that Fretting and Moaning is not autobiographical, there's the challenge that you have to use your imagination to tell the story, but there's also the
Well, there's some
freedom to not have to get every fact
yeah,
right.
no, you've got to be a writer. You've got to go, okay, imagination, writing ability, talent for telling a story. I mean, there's a couple. I have to think about which ones they are, but one like Halcyon Days is very much exactly what happened to me.
Tell me about that one, because that was actually one, I do have a few that I cherry picked that I wanted to ask about and see how much was fact and fiction. And that was actually on my list. So tell me about that one.
Well, I can tell you about that one. I was playing a lot with this other guitar player in Brazil, and we had a whole series of dates. And I was a little bit, because it's all on steel string acoustic guitar. So it's technically difficult. We're playing for fast kind of jazzy music. It was pretty, technically challenging as a guitar player to get through all this stuff. And I knew that I was going to get down there that night. Next day, the gig was going to happen. So, I was so determined to sleep the whole 12 and a half hours to Sao Paulo. And I started drinking wine, and I took these Halcyon tablets, 3, incredible, who knew, plus alcohol. And, that the next thing I knew was, after I sunk back in the airline chair, was that I was in the room in the hotel, and everything seemed normal to me. Yeah, I'm in Brazil. And I went looking with the guy, and he's looking at me very strangely, but not saying anything. The other guitar player came over, and I'd slept for about 20 hours straight, knocked out, taken out of the airport in a wheelchair. And
oh my God.
Yeah, I was on fire. I had so much energy. And then he said, right, goodbye, mate, like at midnight. And I went back to bed. Then at 2:00 in the morning, I sat up upright. Suddenly it came to me. How did you get here? Mm-hmm. And I realized that there was this void, and I've never remembered it. I can't remember it. And, then the guy told me the whole story about how they wheeled me out of the airport in a wheelchair. And
oh my God.
The woman said he has 1 hour to live. The only thing I got is like a fragment of a giant hypodermic needle going into my arm. And there's a lady doctor stayed with me for 3 hours until I seemed to be breathing.
Oh my God, it was that serious.
It was pretty close to the edge, yeah. I'll never do that again. I never even told my family for 3 years.
Don't do that. Yeah. That's a bad idea.
Stupid. Wow. Yeah, that was the end of those adventures.
So there are some, kind of themes. Obviously, the stories are all very different. And as you mentioned, take place in different decades. And sometimes they're told from a woman's point of view or a man. But there are some themes that just kept coming up. It seems like the two main inspirations for this book and in your life are girls and guitars. Like it's either you write a lot, you write very rhapsodically about women and the female form, and equally rhapsodically about guitars.
Do I really? Yeah. Well, that's nice. I mean, why not? Tribute to women, tribute to guitars. Most guitar players, you say, why do you take up the guitar to get girls? I mean, this has always been the cliched response. And, there's a certain amount of truth in that, of course, but it's not the entire truth. 99% maybe. No, of course, we're all kids who are, we're like young men out with guitars. And of course, it's a power thing, we get fans, of course, of both genders, girls who want to get close to the guys and guys who want to be able to play guitar like that, the nerds, so this is a lifetime of this. I think it's all wonderful. What's wrong with, music and, attraction between the genders and all that is always, time immemorial.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely some of the, the passionate and, flowery, if that is the right word, because I mean it in a positive way. But, that the most rhapsodic writing, I feel, was about those two things. Another thing I noticed was there was a lot of stuff about sexual frustration, usually in the context of a longer term relationship. There's the yoga story. There's the Carter Lewis story. There's the guy who calls up the escort. That's a common theme I keep seeing. Where is that coming from? See, I read the whole book. I paid attention.
You're good. Okay, I'm going to really be good here. I didn't even realize. I was thinking them not in terms of sexual frustration, more as comedy. I just thought this was a funny situation. The one about the guy and his wife turning out to be a hooker and all that, he's retired. It wasn't a musician. That story, somebody mentioned something along the line of that story, and I made that mental note. I remembered it, and then I turned it into the story about the retired country music star, Carter and Lewis. That just came into my head one day, and I had no idea. I just went, Carter and Lewis, Lewis Carter, two country stars, and somehow I developed that story there. But of course, the sexual attraction thing in there, and somebody cheating on their spouse is always good conflict for a story.
So Carter Lewis and Lewis Carter are completely fictional. They're not based on any real life rivalry in music.
Complete fiction.
Okay.
Completely
I feel like
fiction.
that would be a good
Yeah, I made
film.
that up.
I feel like you could do like a whole movie, TV show just about that love triangle. I think that
you could.
That was a good
I
one.
mean, I have thought along those lines. There might be something like that in here, because these stories are all connected, obviously, by the guitar. That's what it is. And I thought it was a very, in terms of writing, it would be, if I was to put the effort into this, it would be a popular move. People would like to hear me writing those kind of stories. So instead of writing something, like a crime novel or, World War II, this was something that would come without too much difficulty. I mean, you still got to sit down and conjure it all up, but I don't think I'll do any more of this. I think that was that's just it.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have actually got some more stories, but I haven't put them in this book. It was 45, a lot of stories.
45's a lot of stories. So, and then the other theme that I kind of jotted down that I saw weaving through a lot of them was sort of about aging or mortality. There's this, there's the retired country singer who's kind of feels like he's lost his sexual mojo. There's the guy who shaves his head because he's like, I'm losing my hair. There's a lot of that in there. Where does that theme come from?
Well, I mean, I've done it for a long time, and of course, there are a lot of old rockers. When we grew up as kids, you go, well, if you're past 28, you can't possibly be a rock and roller anymore. Well, that sure ain't true. Look at the Stones; they're all close to 80, and they're just about to go on tour again. In fact, Charlie Watts is not even going to make it, which is a bit sad. But Mick and Keith will be there, and I guess Ronnie would, for whatever it's worth. So we all come from that generation. And it hasn't gone away, including me, including the Police and my allies in that band. And we got older, but I like to, in defense of all that, all the magic for a talent for music is not necessarily given to you in the youth, because it is an art. And as you get older, you're supposed to get better and better at it, not weaker and weaker. I feel like I'm playing better than I've ever played.
Well, actually, that's interesting, because also in a preparation for this interview, I watched the documentary that was actually based on your memoir. I watched Can't Stand Losing You.
Yeah.
And I guess I knew this, but I'd sort of forgotten that I guess by rock and roll standards, you were, in terms of the huge success you had with the Police, you were kind of a late bloomer, because you were like 30 when you joined the Police, right? Which again, that's not old, but you just said 28, people are thinking it's too, you were a little bit of a late bloomer in terms of the commercial success.
The breakout, but I was in bands before that, of course. I mean, my path is a slightly strange one, because I started out as a teenager. I was playing since I was like 13 years old, always in bands. And I went to London to live with some pals from my hometown. And we were a very successful rhythm and blues band. Never stopped working. We made a very good living for a few years. Then I came to California. And for some reason, I thought, I've done enough of that. Just a weird thing. And I dropped out in LA, lived in Laurel Canyon, and went to college. And I studied classical guitar. And then things were getting a bit desperate for me. And I decided to return to England, where I hadn't been for 5 years. I took my wife, or the girl I was about to marry, back to England with me, who were still together. And, within 3 years, I was in the Police, and the rest,
Rest was history. Did you think at some point when, you were pushing 30 or whatever, and you'd been in these other bands? It's not old. I'm well over 30, trust me. But I'm just saying, like, rock and roll, people think if you haven't made it.
I know it's a tired cliche, because, I definitely think people get better and rock harder even when they're older. I mean, look at all the great ones. There's so many.
But had you started thinking of your plan B, like maybe you got to get a regular job? Is that why you went to university?
No, it's not at all. I went to university for love of music. I found that much differently than England, it was very easy for me to get into college here and study music. I was very into classical guitar. So, I studied music formally. So I was a very educated musician, as well as being a great guitar player. By the time I got back to the UK, then I was sort of surviving in the UK, and I was in some bands that were really well liked. And actually my star was rising fast. I was in the music papers. I got sort of noted.
You almost were in the Stones. It could have been.
I almost were. Well, yeah, you're right. You see, so I was starting to get there just surely through, the fingers. And then out of nowhere came the punk scene. And one thing led to another. And just by sort of strange set of events, I met up with Sting and Stewart. And, it's like I threw everything I knew out the window to join this absolutely unknown punk band, so-called fake punk band. The rest is history. And off we went, and there was nothing, no money, no gigs, nothing.
I actually remember, I think it was in The Police's Behind the Music, where there was something about, like, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but like you guys were trying to be a punk band because that was what was in vogue in the UK at the time. But you guys were just too good of musicians to pull off the punk thing.
Yeah, we couldn't really pull it off. We were fake. And I think that, the punks at some level knew that. We got a few gigs, so we did. We played at the Marquee. We played at some clubs in London. People spat on us and all the rest of it. And,
oh, really?
Yeah. We played.
Oh, yeah. Spit on you as like an affectionate punk thing, or because they were like, hey, you're not really.
No, it was affectionate punk, but they were going. I found it just horrendous, I mean, that lasted about 6 months and then that went away. But the whole punk scene disappeared after only about 3 years. Didn't last all that long. But the big moment for us was, there we were, hanging by a thread. We came to the States. We did a very underpaid 3-week tour. I think we were getting $200 a night. We played CBGBs, some clubs on the East Coast. We went to Boston and we were #1 in Boston as an import record being played by Oedipus on WBCM. That was like, whoa, and then A&M America got interested in us, and it just seemed like things were looking up, but we were still like completely poverty stricken. We finished that tour at CBGB's again, went home, and that was it. It's kind of the end of the band. And then our so-called manager, Mars Copeland, said, oh, there's one, you could get it. We could put you on a support act with this group called the Albertos. And they were a college rock band. They were well known in England and popular. So we said, all right, whatever. You can get £50 a night. Again, seriously underpaid. So we drove down to a place called Bath in the West Country of England to play at the university. And we thought, all right, well, we're good boys. We're the support group. So we went on stage at, something like 7:30 to, be the opening act for the Albertos. The place was held about 1,000. It was packed to the rafters with punks. And guess who were there? And the minute we started playing, the place was a complete and utter frenzy. Chaos. It was for us. They were going absolutely mad for us. So we'd had 2 singles out, and somehow they hadn't done anything in London, but they penetrated around the rest of the country. We had sobbing girls, people throwing themselves on the stage. It was incredible. First show. The Albertos were standing at the side of the stage with white faces, like, oh my God. We did 21 shows, 21 nights with them. Every night was the same thing, a complete and utter riot. And after that, so off we went,
So it's interesting, when I was watching the Can't Stand Losing You documentary, which of course, goes into quite famously the friction or, the band relations within the Police. Yeah. And I realized, so you were, given the fact that the history we just talked about, you were like 10 years older than Stewart. You're 10 years older than Stewart. Sure. And a bit older than Sting, I'm not sure. Yeah. So I'm wondering if any of that friction or rivalry or whatever you want to call it, like you went into it with a lot more experience, not just in terms of age and life experience, but all the bands you've been in, stuff like, did that play into the dynamic at all, that you were like kind of on a different plane?
Well, you're going to get different theories from different people. I mean,
I'm asking you. For your theory.
Well, I'll quote Stewart. He said, well, when Andy came in the band, I wasn't the band leader anymore. That was the end of that, because obviously I had more experience and I was definitely the better musician, may I say. And, what are you going to do? And it did change the dynamic. I never actually felt any age difference at all. We were 3 guys all trying to make it together. And, there's always personality differences. And I think that's what makes it work. People, there's so much tension. How could you possibly stay together? I said, that's what made it work. That was what would come across to the audience. You got 3 alpha males like bearing down on the audience. Yeah. They're no like, what shall I play? This was 3, I think it's exactly what made very forward people all together in one band. It makes for a dynamic, which I think the audience feels. Absolutely.
That's exactly what I was going to ask, if that kind of friction actually, at least for a while, worked in your guys' favor.
It worked, yeah. I think towards the end of the career of the police, it probably was starting to drag a bit,
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm sure you've been asked about this before, but there are maybe the Beatles is the only one that comes to mind where I can think of a band that kind of, at least at the time, called it a day at such a peak. I mean, 1983 was the year of the police. It was the year of synchronicity. It was everywhere. I wanted to go to the US Festival so bad. My mom would not let me go. I was still mad about it. But I mean, you were everywhere, obviously, like the VMAs and every breath you take. I just interviewed Kevin Godley, by the way. We talked about that video.
Yeah.
It was absolutely, you already had so much success, but then it went up a whole bunch of notches with synchronicity.
Yeah.
And then you ended it, which is kind of badass. It's kind of like great, like the Beatles, to kind of go out when it's still like at such a high, but it's not the way it normally is. And it is kind of odd. Like I don't know the story about why at that moment you could have at least, you certainly could have followed up synchronicity with another.
No, there's more underground reasons. I mean, the obvious reason, Sting's suddenly thought he could be his own guy and didn't need the band anymore. We made 5 records for A&M. I can understand that. And, at the time, it seemed like sort of a cute idea. Yeah. Of course, it was absolutely devastating. But the problem with it was that we didn't announce it and say, that's the end of the police. We're not going to do anymore. We didn't do that. The manager, Miles Copeland, wanted to keep it kind of quiet. No, don't give it away. Don't give it away. Never saying a word. That lasted about a year. No, we're coming back. And then it just got, I'm fed up of lying. I'm not going to do this anymore. And then I certainly started saying, no, the band's broken up, and then it all started to come out. Very upsetting. And they tried to get us back together, but that's another story, which was kind of pathetic, actually.
Are you talking about the 86 Don't Stand So Close to Me thing?
Ludicrous. Yeah. Well, it could have maybe had a chance, but the problem actually in real life terms was that we were going to be in the studio in the north of London, and we were. The night before we went in, Stuart went out on a horse, fell off, broke his collarbone, couldn't play drums. No. End of story.
Maybe that was, did you take that time at that time as maybe a sign of from the universe saying like, this shouldn't happen?
Kind of like a sign from the universe. Yeah, it sort of was. It's like, man, what a, no, but I guess, well, there was all these people, are they going to get back together? God, we hope so. We really hope so, because there's so much money there. And Stuart, down he went. That was the end of that.
So you say you were devastated at that time.
Well, I was starting to get over it by then. I'd sort of, it was very difficult at first. It's like, anyway, we're all human. I'd been in it, in that scene for about 8 years, with a total entourage all the time. Everybody like, oh my God, this went on for years. And then suddenly it's not there anymore. Well,
were you angry? Was there any anger about it?
I think it was just like a sort of psychic vacuum. Like, now what? The only way to get it back together was to play music, which is what I did. I started to record again, and so it was the creative process itself that was healing, and gradually all that amazing stuff with the place. It'd be very bad to hang on to that and think I was defined by that band. No, I don't agree with that. And I recorded with Robert Fripp. We made 2 albums, started making albums on my own. I started to feel healthy, and off we went. I got back with my wife, had 2 kids. Life started to resume again, without this band, I mean, that being a band like that at the level we're at is extremely demanding. There's not really much room for anything else whatsoever.
I'm a little
People
surprised.
don't realize that now, but this was extreme fame. We were like the Beatles. We were all over the world. We were highly recognized, and it was crazy.
What was most difficult about that fame at its most extreme?
I think just keeping your head straight and not getting crazy with it. I mean, there's so many routes, obviously drugs and all that, that kind of life you could take. But I mean, one of the things about our lot was that we were a really good band and we had to play very well together. So, I think there's at some point, when you start to get it, you're attracting all these people all the time. You could go down the party lane, which we did at the beginning. And I think we all realized hey, you know, we can't do this. We can't do this every night. We have to be like super good musicians, which is what we were sort of known for. We weren't like a sort of simple punk band. We
No.
played complex music. So that aspect didn't destroy us. In fact, I think the fact that we had to play so well was what held us together. You know?
Well, obviously that's a testament to again, I just watched this documentary last night. I like to have things fresh in my mind. I was not aware that, ironically, despite its title, Synchronicity, that it seems like you were all recording it in like different rooms and you were like kind of not on the same page in terms of like your friendship, at least. And yet, as I've mentioned, it was your most successful record.
Well, there's a lot of legend and talk about all that. No, look, we were three blokes together, and there was a lot of camaraderie and humor. We were a band. We had our band humor. We were a unit. So we were used to, God, we were together, all those years, 24/7. So no, there was camaraderie as well. And whenever the dice was thrown out, we would stand together. We wouldn't be three different opinions. Somehow we locked. And we said, no, that's not for us. We were able to do that. So, yeah, but they hated each other. No, we didn't.
Yeah, that is the mythology that surrounds.
It's mythology, but it's not true. I don't feel hatred. I haven't got time for that. God, I emailed twice with Sting this week. I told Stuart the other day. Yeah, it's rubbish. So, we did go back on an incredibly successful reunion tour. There has to be something there. We have shared a past that we all share together. It was probably the greatest thing in our lives for all of us. We ain't going to forget it. It's who we are. So I don't really like it when people say, oh, there's so much hatred. No, you don't know. You weren't there. You don't know that. You're just like, you're going to the sort of tabloid line.
Mm-hmm.
Bullshit.
Well, that's why, I guess you sort of answered my question, because I was about to say I was a little surprised given the fact that you moved on and did not want to define yourself just by your work in the police, that you signed up for that tour in 2007, which, as you mentioned, was hugely successful. It's like one of the top grossing tours, I think, in rock history. Yes. What made you want to do that, given the fact that you had already at that point so effectively, it had been 5 years that you'd very effectively moved on from that?
Well, I thought there's several answers to that. I thought we could do it in a much saner way. We could play very well, but we didn't have to get caught up because we already had that, and we were still that. We're all famous people. We don't have to get caught up in all that. We can just play very well. I personally felt this is going to be the best we've ever played. We've all been musicians, even since the original breakup. None of us ever stopped. I've never stopped practicing the guitar. I'm playing better than I ever played. I also felt like we could take advantage of the incredible technology that has become available since the kind of funky days of when we were early 80s. By the time it got to 2007, the technology was superb. We lived like kings, and we played to 50,000, 80,000 people a night for 2 years. It was an amazing tour. And I thought it was the best we ever played. So, it was... a lot of reasons to do it. I also wanted my kids to see it. How about that? I said, I used to be in this band, it was really big. They go, yeah, Dad. Yeah, sure. Well, guess what? We played at the Staples Center. They came down and went,
yeah, they were impressed, right? They were impressed.
So I brought them to all the best gigs around the world. They came to London, New York, Paris. They saw the big one.
How old were they at that point?
They were 18.
All right, perfect age. Were you surprised at all by, given the fact that the Police hadn't done anything for over 20 years at that point and had all gone on to do other things, by how well received that tour was, how it was so massively successful? Yeah,
well, it was a bit nervous making, but we do have a huge number of major hits or legendary songs. We do, and they haven't gone away, how many times a day is Every Breath You Take? It's the most played song on American radio.
Can we talk for a minute about how many people misunderstand that song, since you brought it up? It's a Stalker song.
It is. That's what it is. It was Sting getting divorced from his first wife. And, I think that was the actual, and he says this, that was the impetus for the lyric, not, oh, everybody, you're so wonderful. The opposite.
And yet people play it as they're like,
I know.
They say it's their song. They play it as like a first dance at a wedding. And I'm like, you guys, pay attention.
Whatever. Yeah.
You have a stalker story in your book, Fretting and Moaning.
Yes, I do.
Is that based on any truth in your life? I've
had a few stalkers personally,
I assume you haven't hired a fake one like in the
No,
book.
no.
All right, that's
I
good.
just thought it was a funny idea that, you know, the guy realizing that he's got to get into the tabloid, he's got to get on the front page. You need a stalker. So he gets one of his girl fans to do it for him, but of course it all goes south and he gets into trouble. Anyway,
But you've had on a less humorous note, you've actually had real
Oh,
ones.
yeah.
Did they ever like cross a line into some real dodgy
No,
territory?
well, you know, I had one on the internet that we somehow we managed to ban her for after a while. Like everything on the always putting crap about me on the internet. I don't know, you're just some obsessed with it. She was in Pennsylvania and she was part of some religious thing, and she just had this, you know, thing in her head. And she wrote a lot of nasty things about me until I think we finally managed to track her down and find out her name and where she was. And I'm pretty sure it was somewhere outside of Pittsburgh. Yeah, it was kind of weird. And you know, just crossed the name off being able to enter anything about me on the internet.
So, but nothing where you actually like.
No, I didn't get no
That's
physical contact. No.
That's good. So as I mentioned, I know that your memoir served as the backbone for the documentary I've been talking about, but
Yes.
is there any, now with this book, Fretting and Moaning, is there any talk about it being adapted? I feel like it would be the absurdist humor in it could be good for like some kind of Netflix series or something.
Well, I'm very happy that you say that, because I think that, and I've actually haven't managed to get anybody to cross the line yet, but I do think the unifying aspect, you know, there's so much weird stuff on TV now and presumably they're looking for something to do. You've got the guitar, you know, these weird sort of 30-minute episodes. I would like to do that because I think it could, you know, they're written like that. Some of it definitely sort of beginning, middle, and end stories. Not all of them. Some are much more abstract, like the one-page ones about the guy shaving his head. I don't know if that's one, but they're I think I count, as I've looked at it, there's 10 or 12 that I think could be made in a TV series.
What sort of humor inspires you? Like, where do you get it from? It's and I mean this in a completely complimentary way. I think it's very British. British humor and American humor are very different.
Yes, you're right. No, it is British. I'm a Brit. It's definitely British humor and the sense of irony and these. I mean, a lot of stories end in, well, no, I wouldn't say tragedy, but they've got a dark twist at the end, you know, and that's the way it is. That's the European sensibility, you know, as opposed to Hollywood. You know, if it's Spielberg, everything ends up nicely, ties up every little note, and we're all smiling at the end. That's not the European way or the British way. You know, we produce people like Ricky Gervais. It's very dark and I think very funny.
Yeah, he doesn't always go over so well here. Obviously, when he hosted the Golden Globes, I thought he was hilarious, and there were a lot of people who Russell Brand's another one. When he hosted the VMAs about 10 years ago, people kind of didn't get his humor.
Completely offensive. Yeah. When you watch the Golden Globes with Ricky Gervais and you look down at the audience, you see like famous actors. They're Americans. They're like they're almost pale. They can't stand with this. That he confronts them like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. It just shows how fragile they are. Like, and I think Ricky's right. He's brilliant, in my opinion.
What other writers, British or otherwise, humorous or otherwise, inspired, you know, that are, you know, in writing this book that are like writers you like to read yourself or whatever?
Well, yeah, absolutely. No, because it does come from home. I'm a non-stop reader, always with the book, you know, and, you know, I'm trying to think of all the people that, you know, there've been so many. You know, I really like Martin Amis, you know, some of his humor, very British and very sardonic. And the early books in particular are very funny. American writer I like to read a lot, and he mostly writes about the West, is Sam Shepard.
Okay.
You know, I think his writing's very nice and very, you know, funny, some of it. God, I mean, it just goes on forever, you know. Chekhov, actually. I like Chekhov. I know that sounds a bit literary, but they're very ironic stories. I like irony, you know, I mean, the human fragility and frailty that gets displayed, and, you know, the life doesn't go quite how you think it is. So, you know, I'm definitely influenced by that kind of material. No, I also like Murakami, the Japanese writer, a lot too. Not so much ironic, but just kind of daft and magical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that stuff.
So you mentioned how a lot of these stories in the book end with a twist, but some of them kind of end with a cliffhanger. Again, I mean this complimentary, but they end kind of abruptly. and leaving it a little bit open to interpretation about what's next. There were a couple times when I first started reading the book and I didn't realize how episodic it was. I thought it would maybe be, there'd be a sequel, like there, you know, it would be threaded through, and this character or this storyline would pop up in another chapter 50 pages down the road. But instead it's like,
Yeah.
you just kind of have to fill in the blanks with your own imagination about what exactly happened.
Oh, it
when
didn't
someone
necessarily
opened
pay off. Yeah.
No, it pays off, but I feel it was a deliberate thing on your point to not spell everything out and to leave it a little open when it ends somewhere. Like for instance, where the guy opens the door at the hotel and you have to sort of figure out who he saw when he opened the door, or the end of the yoga story or whatever.
Yeah.
It just
Oh,
there's
yeah.
not a period on the
Well,
end
it's
of the
great, isn't
sentence.
it? You get to the end of the
ellipses.
yoga story and she's just been, having sex with the, the guru. He steps in, looks at her books and decides that, I've got to take her this. Anyway, there is one character that I did put in 4 or 5 times. That's Sullivan, and he's this rock star.
Okay.
And I think close to the end, he appears in the story with this young girl in the East End of London, but he's only about 9 years old, and he's already on it writing songs on guitar. And she wants to, oh God, you're great, Sully. How did you do that? You're only bloody 9 years old, and he's already there. Of course, he becomes a massive rock star. Yeah.
We all have to start somewhere. We all need an origin story.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
But was that a deliberate thing? Because you were talking about like how like say Spielberg will kind of neatly tie things up with a bow. Did you deliberately want to leave some of the stories kind of like dangling a little bit so that people can sort of
that's kind of what I like personally. Like I mean, if you tie up all the knots at so I find it makes me feel sick. Dude, like you can't do that. It's like, there's such a thing as abstraction. It's like playing a piece of music and always end on a big obvious tonic chord. You don't do that. Not if you've been educated really in music. You would never do that. We end on a poignant chord that leaves everyone hanging like, oh my, we're not going to hit the final da-da. That's what Spielberg does. And a lot of Hollywood filmmakers do. That's popular cinema. I mean, if you're more literary, you definitely wouldn't do that. I'm talking about, Fellini, Truffaut, any of these kind of European house film directors. It's more true to life. Life doesn't end with all these neatly tied up little things. So it's much more open-ended, I think.
Do you want
also, it gives the the reader or the viewer, a chance to imagine, rather than going, oh, okay, that's the end of it,
Do you want to write a screenplay? Not necessarily, it could be a screenplay that's based on this book, but since we're making so many filmic references in this interview, is that something that's on your to-do list?
Yes, it is. I can't, I'm a movie buff. Is that the right word?
I can tell, yeah.
I'm totally into cinema. Yeah, I love it. Especially all the kind of art house stuff, and all the stuff that's on Criterion. That's my kind of thing. I love Kurosawa, for instance. It's one of my real favorites. Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm doing a strange thing at the moment. I've got this idea for a film, for a screenplay, which I started in a very different, much more art way, because I was going to build it all out of photographs with a voiceover. And I got to a point with it where I was kind of couldn't make it move forward I thought maybe I don't have the photographs to do this. I shot a whole series in my touring times of photographs on the Tokyo subway. I went in the Tokyo. I did this a few times, and I've got all these crazy photographs of Japanese people on the subway. So I was trying to build this scenario out of this guy appearing on the subway, and then this whole story unfolds. Then I got to a point where I felt like I didn't have enough of a story to justify the photography. It's going to be all made from still photographs. So I started to write another narrative, and that is now turning into actually more like, this one is like a Hollywood beginning, middle, and end, where it does all get tied up at the end, but it's very comic and entertaining. So weirdly, I'm writing it as a screenplay in final draft, and I'm also writing it as a novel at the same time. It's weird. Wow. Yeah, it's different, much more writing, because if you're writing a screenplay, you can't write a whole page of description like that. That's not a screenplay. Screenplays are very tight. Someone speaks and there's one line saying what the next thing's going to be. So I'm sort of having fun with it, but it's two mindsets. I'm going from ward, but from one to another. But I think what it does is it sort of sparks the imagination. I come up with an idea that I hadn't thought of before, because I'm sort of going between the two sort of slightly separate mediums. We'll see. Maybe something, you know.
We will see. How do you feel about the idea of a police biopic? Rock biopics are all the rage. Aretha, you know, is the Respect movies coming out. Obviously, Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody were huge. And, you know, the documentary was interesting you know, as a documentary, but I feel like it could be a good scripted film as well. Or one just about you even, but it could be.
Yeah, I thought there were quite a lot about the police out there. I mean, Sting did a film, Stewart did a home movie. I did the one on my book.
But those aren't biopics though.
No. How would you define a biopic?
Like a scripted, like Bohemian Rhapsody, like a scripted movie about the story of the police with you know, George Clooney playing you or whoever, you know,
thank you,
actors with actors and a script, you know, like
like it, people acting us. I have thought about that actually. Like, you know what I think it could be is a musical, like just that would be every song is a hit. Come on, you know. But I think a biopic, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if that could be, because the Queen one, I don't know.
Yeah, I liked the Rocket Man one, which actually was a more musical. The Elton John one was.
Yeah, that was not bad. I watched that.
I didn't really like the Bohemian Rhapsody one that much, just because
I just couldn't believe
it.
Rami Malek. He's not Freddie Mercury, and he's not as good. He just, you know, I thought Freddie's, you know, more in your face. Freddie was, you know, fantastic. I mean, I'm not a fan of Queen, but you know.
You're not? Oh wow.
No,
you're like the one person I've ever met who's not.
Really?
Everyone.
Well, I love Bohemian Rhapsody because it's one of the worst, most tasteless songs ever recorded. It's just terrible, and yet it works because it's like a cartoon.
It's super over the top, but in a way that I, you know, appreciate.
I don't mind. Yeah, no, I mean, I liked it when, you know, those two American comedians did it. You know,
the Wayne's World guys. Yeah, that was good times.
Right.
I actually thought Rami was very good in the role. That was actually the redeeming
he's a good actor.
Me. I just thought that Spielberg thing you talked about, it was too like feel good and like PG rated. Like this is Queen in the 70s. You got to have the drugs and the sex, and it's not like, yay, we're putting a band together. Yeah, I like a gritty movie. So if a police movie happened, I'd want, you know, a gritty R-rated police movie.
I'm going to talk to my manager about that. I think you've got a very good idea there. Who would play me?
Yeah, who would play you guys?
Yeah,
they have to bleach their hair, at least for the early scenes.
Well, we have to have great actors. Who's the young guy that's so great now? Chapelet. You know,
Timothy Chalamet. I want him in everything. So
yeah, he is.
He's great.
What a talent!
I love him. He's
very
so
talented.
So I completely co-sign that. So you've got a lot obviously already going on. You've got this book coming out next week on the 19th. You've got this novel you're working on that could also be a screenplay. Don't you have an instrumental album coming out?
I have a new album, which unfortunately is the longest I've had, about a year and a half of without putting a record out, which is very unusual for me.
Oh, wow.
Mostly pandemic oriented, you know. Now I have a photography show in London opening on the 21st of October called Harmonics of the Night. All the photographs in it are shot at night around the world. And about 2 weeks before that, the record Harmonics of the Night will be released. Yeah.
Awesome. Just that.
Reaction.
And you have aren't you working on, aren't there a lot of rollout plans for the police catalog, expanding that?
Yeah, I'm very pleased that finally, and this was all instigated by me, and it's actually taken about 5 years. It's absolutely incredible. You have an idea, a simple idea was that, you know, in the early 80s, 81, I think it was, we traveled the world, and then they put out this, everything was filmed, China, Egypt, India, everywhere, you name it, we played. The whole thing was filmed, police around the world, and it came out on, you know, DVD at the time, and then just sort of disappeared. Like, it's a fantastic document. You know, I look back at it and God, we're so young, and the band is on fire. Oh, so good, because it was early, before we'd really got up there, you know. And so anyway, long time. It's now coming out on a souped up, you know, HD, all reworked, 16mm film, the tracks all remixed. It's fantastic. The tracks from Kyoto are stunning. Yeah, God, the band was absolutely on fire. Just played it to a journalist the other day, and he went, "My God, I can't even believe it." Yeah. So that's actually, I think it's supposed to come out this no, in October, but I think it's going back to next March. But it'll come out probably with a live record from that tour and vinyl. And there's something else. Oh, CBGBs. This is brand new to me. We did CBGBs 3 times. I think we ended that first US tour, and it was recorded just off the speakers, I think, or something, not mic'd up properly, but on mono, on a 16-track recorder. I didn't even know this existed, but they found it, and they're going to bring that out.
Wow.
That's pretty raw. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I almost didn't want to ask this because I'm sure you get asked it all the time, but when you talk about how on fire you guys were, you still marvel at it years later when you see this footage or hear it. And obviously the reunion tour is successful. Has there ever been any talk, maybe not doing another like full on reunion tour, but like maybe a one-off thing for like Led Zeppelin did for charity, one or for to mark some kind of anniversary or anything like that?
Well, you'd have to talk Sting into it. I mean, all these things are for us.
All right, I'll give them a call.
Hovering. Yeah, please do. They're hovering. You know, I mean, I've said things like, let's do 1 week. What's the big stadium? Not the stadium here. The where's it we all play before we get to the Dodger Stadium?
Hollywood Bowl.
No, yeah, done that. No, the other one. 1 week here and 1 week at Madison Square Gardens. That's it. And we're done because we like to play at the Gardens. It's a great venue.
But I saw Sting. I just read the headline. I didn't read the interview, but I saw some headline where he said he thought the reunion in 2007 was not a great idea, which I find it hard to believe given that we talked about how successful everything was.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal tour. He says stuff like that. I said, oh, get over yourself. Yeah. And anybody who would say that, I'd say, excuse me. Yeah, it's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I'll give him a call and see if I can change his
Yeah,
mind. You obviously got lots going on though, so you have other things to.
Life, I mean, it's incredible. Like here we are in a pandemic. I've never been so busy in my life. It's amazing. I'm just running to keep up with it all.
That's amazing.
I mean, the only thing we can do right now is, if we can't do gigs and go out and be entertainers, is to make things, keep making things. So I think, I was talking to the manager this morning, it's a product. Let's keep making products until they let us out of the cage.
Well, I appreciate that you have the new product, Fretting and Moaning, coming out. I enjoy it very much. And thanks for speaking with me.